There. Good afternoon and welcome to the August crop production and WASDE briefings. My name is Lance Hoding and I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board here at NASS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We're very pleased that joining us today as Secretary Designate is Jason Hafemeister. He is USDA's Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs. We also welcome Dr. Seth Meyer, USDA's Chief Economist. Mr. Secretary, Dr. Meyer, I'm happy to share that we have a number of visitors with us today, as you probably noticed when you walked in the room. That includes some farmers from Indiana Farm Bureau, Soybean Alliance, and Corn Marketing Council. We've got visitors from the Michigan Agribusiness Association, and also some Cochrane Fellows from Algeria. So welcome to all. And as you saw, just down the hall, we've got a number of NASS newish employees watching from the overflow room as well. So again, welcome to all. I'd also like to express our appreciation to some folks from outside this office space in NASS who came in to help us with the report. So we appreciate that. We've got Noemi Ginden from our Research and Development Division. She's down in Florida. Mike Clam from our Little Rock office. And last but not least, Roger Ott from our Denver office, also on that side, who came in graciously to help us really over the weekend and last week, right? We spanned a weekend on this one. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of these reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. Both NASS and World Board staff are available for phone or email questions, and NASS will be hosting a social media event at 1:15 Eastern Time this afternoon. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn things over to Fleming Gibson. He is the acting chief of the NASS Crops Branch. Fleming will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Fleming.
All right, good afternoon. As you guys know, this is August and it's a rather full report, so we'll get straight into it. So let's look first at our data sources. We have 4 different sources of data this month for our report. Our first is our farmer reported, our ag yield survey. That we went out to a little over 14,000 operations and collected data from July 30th through August 6th. We also have our 10-state objective yield region for winter wheat. And we went out and had our field enumerators go out and take samples from the different fields and little over 1,000 samples there. We also used our remote sensing, our NDVI information as well. And last, we also used our FSA certified acres this month, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Getting a feel for where the samples are for the month of August. As you can expect, our samples are grouped more heavily in our more heavily ag districts that were associated with the crops for this report. As you guys probably realize or remember, NASS did put out an ASB notice on July 30th, July 31st, referencing that we would be making updates for our planted and harvested acreage estimate. This was also something we shared at the fall data users meeting last fall to make sure that everyone was aware. And on today's report, we have a special note referencing the crops that we'll be updating using most prominently the latest certified acreage data from FSA. So let's get into the numbers. So let's look at corn. So our corn good to excellent rating for this year, which is represented by the red line, is currently at 67%. And we also on this chart display the previous 5 years, and you can compare against that. And if you're for last year, it was 57% for the same time last year. Looking at the maturity of the crop, similar chart is what we just looked at. Focus on the 5 years, the current year's the red line, focusing on the 5 prior seasons and how we compare against those. And as you can see, we started a little bit earlier this season, but we're back in the normal range. So in our table to actually focus on the numbers that we're updating here. So to get a feel for what we're setting for corn, our planted acreage estimate is currently at 90,748,000 acres. That change is down 0.8% from the prior estimate, or about 727,000 acres. Similarly, our harvested estimate is also down about 0.9%, 728,000 acres on that end. Our first yield for the year, this is a record yield at 183.1 bushels per acre. That's up 3.3% from last year, and our overall production estimate at 15.1 billion bushels. So let's look at those numbers in a little more detail. So looking at our corn acreage, as you can see, this includes our updates from today and the prior 10 seasons. There's kind of a peach colored line that represents our planted line. And then we also have the harvested line, which is in the yellow or gold color. And you can see very similar conditions for our acres that we've seen in the past. So let's look at the yield. For this chart, we compare against the prior 30 years. So looking back at the prior 30 years, we also drafted just a simple trend line across there. And you can see, obviously, at the far right-hand corner is this year's yield. And you can see, obviously, it's the highest that we've had. So that's at the national level. So let's dig into the states a little bit. When we look at the change from previous year, for our states, let me walk you through this map a little bit. So there are basically two main colors of the map. There's blue, which is increasing from the previous year. And there's red, which is decreasing from the previous year. These are obviously corn yields in bushels. There's a couple of things to note. The more dark the color, the more significant the change from the prior year. Also, you may notice that there is a pound. If you see a pound sign, that indicates a record high yield. So as we go through the US, in addition to the United States yield being a record high, we also are seeing record high yields in Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Michigan, Nebraska, South Dakota, Washington, and Wisconsin. All right, so where does our corn production end up compared to some of our prior years? So looking through the chart here for our 10 prior years, this will be the third largest production on record. The first or highest would actually be 2023, and then followed by 2016, and this is, like I said, the third largest. So how does NASA's forecast compare to industry expectations? The way this chart lays out is each blue dot represents an individual industry expectation that was published. And the NASA estimate is obviously the red. And so we are right in line with the industry expectations today. Shifting over to soybeans. Soybeans, very similar chart that we just saw with corn for the good to excellent rating of the crop. This year we're at 68% good to excellent. Compared with last year, we were 54% good to excellent. So looking at maturity of the soybean crop, looks very in line for the prior 5 years. So digging into the numbers on the table here, what do we have? So looking at this, we have for planted acres, we're at 87,100,000 planted acres. That's up 1.2% from the previous estimate. And also just numerically wise, that's up about 1 million acres from those prior estimates. Harvest, very similar changes, obviously, and up as well as 1 million acres from the previous estimate. Looking at yield, we are up 5.1%, up 2.6 bushels to a record high yield of 53.2 bushels per acre. And looking at the production estimate, that comes out to be up 10.2% from the previous year and 4.9 billion bushels, which is also a record high production. Looking at acreage, as you can tell, this kind of gives you our last 10 years of acres, very similar to the corn, what we were looking at. The line color and all is the same. Moving over to yield, obviously we talked about the US is a record and you can see it sits slightly above the trend line and the line moving upward. So let's dig into the individual states. What do we know at the individual states? And we're comparing these against the previous year. So obviously we've got similar to the other map that I showed you about pound signs and the coloration of the map. You can real quickly see we're expecting record high yields in Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Mississippi, and Ohio, in addition to the US. So. How does our production estimate play out? As we talked about, the production estimate is a record high this season, and it's 3% above the previous record, which was 2021. So how do the NASA estimate compare with the industry expectations? Be a little bit on the top end of their expectations, a little bit on the top end of the range. So shifting over and looking at cotton. Similar chart as we've looked at before. As you can see, cotton's a little bit different compared to some of the other crops. As we look at the red line, which is the current year, we started out a little bit better at the beginning of the season, but it's kind of trickled down from where we started out at the beginning of the season. We're currently at 45% good to excellent for the season. Looking at the overall maturity of the crop and how it's progressing through the season, very similar to our other years. So digging into the numbers for our table here, obviously we set a planted forecast back in June, and this is we're updating that planted acreage forecast. We're coming down 4.3%, which will bring us to 11.1 million acres. This is our first harvested forecast of the season. Obviously in August is the first time that we actually are able to put out a harvested estimate. You can see we're up 34.1% from the prior year. Following that up with our yield estimate coming in at 840 pounds to the acre, that's down 6.6%. However, the combination does mean that production will actually come in at 15.1 million bales, up 25.2% from the prior year. You come in and look at cotton acres, very similar to years as we've seen in recent past. There is a rather large disparity between the planted and harvested acres. Looking at yield, we obviously talked about it's not a record, but it is, on the slightly below the trend line, but still towards the top of the chart, as you can see. Overall, it is the lowest yield since 2021. So we've looked at it on a national level. Let's dig into the state level a little bit and look at the individual states. This gives you a rough idea of where all the states are at this point in the season and what we're forecasting for them. Obviously, you've got Texas and Georgia, Arkansas and Mississippi, some of our more major states in the program. When you shift over and look at how the production lays out against prior years, you can see kind of more in our normal range of production where it kind of goes up and down a little bit on that end and kind of just well within the range that we've been following as of late in the last 10 years. So how does this compare against the industry expectations? Maybe a little bit on the low side for this one, compared to some of the expectations that are out there today. Shifting over to winter wheat. Winter wheat, where we're already into the harvest time frame, kind of tracking the harvest to see what percent harvest we are. Kind of, as you can see, and this will show up a little bit later as we in one of the other charts as well. We started out a little early on the harvest, really moved ahead, and then now we've kind of slid back into a kind of normal range on that end. So looking at our winter wheat, comparing the forecast that we set last month, we are down 1% on the acres, on the planted acres, which comes out to be 325,000 acres. For last month, we were down 0.8% for the harvested acres, or 215,000 acres from the previous estimate. Looking at yield's actually up this month. We are up 2.3% from our previous forecast, which is overall increasing production at 1.3 billion bushels. So how do the acres compare? Once again, for the last 10 years, you can kind of see we obviously have the spread between the planted and the harvested, very normal range for us on that end for the HTP side. Looking at our yield, you can see obviously the trend line for yield, we're above the trend line for yield, but obviously not at the record level that we've had in the past. So digging into the states. So this chart or this map is a little bit different because on this map, we're actually looking compared to the previous month. For the other maps that I showed you, they were compared against the previous year. This is against the previous month. So when we compare against the previous month, you can real quickly see quite a few no changes, but also quite a few blues, which would indicate the increase that we're seeing. So We're also expecting record yields in Michigan, Montana, Oregon, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. This chart is similar, or this map is similar to the other maps that I showed you, which is where we're comparing against the previous year. You can see, obviously we saw increases through the plains and the Northwest and, Wisconsin, Michigan area, other parts a little bit lower. So looking at our winter wheat production, how it lays out against the last 10 years, very in line. It'll be the highest production since 2016. This is kind of what I was alluding to earlier when we were looking at the samples that were processed by our lab, and kind of gives you an indication of how harvest is coming in. So as you can see, when you look at the bars for June, you can see we had the highest June that we had in the last 5 years of samples coming in for mature. We followed that up as well when we got into July. And then now if you look at the bar for August, it's very similar to most of the other years. So digging a little bit deeper into those the 10 state region for yield. So on our chart here, we've actually, for the last 5 years, we've plotted the heads per square foot, and we've shown that against the bushels per acre. This is the bushels per acre for the 10 state region, not for the whole US. So just to kind of give you an idea of how we're tracking for the year. Look at winter wheat by class. Our hard red winter wheat, we're up 1.6 from last month. Our soft red winter wheat, we're down 0.4% from last month, and our white winter wheat, we're up 3.7% from last month. So comparing against industry expectations for winter wheat, it's a very tight range, and obviously you guys can see there's some points around the NASA estimate, so seems relatively expected today. All right, so let's look at our other spring wheat. So for other spring wheat, comparing against our previous forecast, we are down 5% on the planted acreage change, 5.1% on our harvested acreage change. Our yield this month is actually down 0.9%, or half a bushel from our previous estimate, and overall production at 543 million bushels. Production is down 34 million bushels from the previous estimate. This is still a record US yield. Digging into our acres a little bit, very tight H to P for the most part, at least, or normal to, no big spreads there on that. Other reference a second ago, we've obviously got for our other spring wheat yield, we're looking at a record high this year. On that end, you can see the trend line, and we are well above the trend line. So digging into our states, as I referenced earlier, for our wheat crops, we're also looking at the previous month. So previous month, as you can see, we've got a kind of mix out of it all. However, I would point out for North Dakota and Minnesota, as well as obviously like we talked about for the US, we're looking at a record yield on that. If we compare against last year, all states are up from last year. So, well, again, when we're looking at production side, our production's kind of in line with where we've been in the last 10 years, very similar to some of the other years. So how does this compare against the industry expectations? We're a little outside of what they were expecting, I think, today. A little on the downside. The range is a little bit higher than ours today. Switching over to durum wheat. Durum wheat comparing against our previous forecast, which was last month, we're 3.7% down on acres. For planted side, roughly 80,000 acres. We're down on the harvest side, 3.6%, about 75,000 acres. Looking at our yield came down 10.8%, 4.6 bushels down. And overall, the reduction in acres and the yield, obviously, also reduction in production, down 12.4 million bushels on this crop for the combination of the acres and the yield reduction on that end. Looking at our acres, kind of getting an idea for what the H to P looks like. Very normal or tight H to P relationship here for the season. As you guys obviously know, zigzags a little bit on the yield. So we're kind of still around the trend line, but it does bounce a little bit for the durum wheat yield. So looking at our changes from the previous month, as I referenced, this is one of those where we did forecast last month. We are down in North Dakota, Montana, California, and Arizona are unchanged. And then switching over and looking at compared against the previous year, we've kind of got half and half. So kind of a mixed bag when we compare against the prior year. Looking at production, very normal range for production, at least that we've seen in the last 10 years. Compared against the trade expectations for durum wheat, we are a little bit below the expectations. It's a very tight range that the trade had for this one, and we're a little bit below it. All right, so digging into some of our other crops that are in today's report, we'll kind of go through these a little bit faster. So a lot of crops to get through on this end. So we'll kind of hit the highlights out of this. So for barley, updating barley, we're down 5.9% from our previous estimate for acres, 6.7% for harvested. Yields up 6.6% from our earlier forecast. It's also up 9.3% from the prior year. And that will actually put us at a record high barley forecasted yield this season. Looking at dry edible beans, we are up from our previous estimate that we set in June for this crop. We're also up significantly from our previous season. Yield for this year expected to be down 0.5%, and our overall production up 28% from the previous season. Looking at alfalfa hay. Alfalfa hay, obviously no change on the harvested acres. From the previous forecast, no change from the previous season. Expecting a 5% increase in the overall yield, which converts into 4.9% production increase. Other hay, no change from our previous forecast, down 3.5% from last year. However, yield up 11.9%, which translates into an 8.1% increase in production for us. Looking at hop acres. Hop acres continues its downward trend. We are up 0.6% from our June forecast for acres, where we went out and went by variety. We're up from that. However, we're down 17.5% from last year. Our yield's expected to be 2.5% above, which is still going to mean that production is going to be down 15.4%. So we're expecting at this point. Let's look at oats. So oats, kind of an unusual thing that we're seeing today. We're up 2.1% on our planted acres. We're up 3.2% for our harvested acres, 5.9% on our overall yield. Compared to our previous forecast, we're up 9.5% compared to the previous year. This is a record high yield for oats at the US level, as well as in Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And all of that is obviously bringing our production up to 67 million bushels. Looking at peanuts. Peanuts were up 2.4% from our prior forecast in June, 2.5% for harvested acres. Our yield is up 4%, coming in at 3,890 pounds to the acre. which is overall going to increase 15.2% for production. Looking a little bit at rice, rice down just slightly from our previous forecast for both planted and harvested. Our overall acres for rice are actually up 1.6% for planted compared to last season, 1.5% on harvested. Yield down just 0.3%, and overall production will be increasing 1.1% for the season. So looking into sorghum, we're seeing a reduction in the planted acreage forecast that we set in June, down 1.6%. Also, which corresponds to 105,000 acres from our previous estimate. Harvest is down 2.1%. Our forecasted harvest for the season is down 2.1% from our prior forecast, which translates into 115,000 acres. Yield is up 0.9 bushels, almost a bushel from last year, which translates into 1.7%. However, overall production is down 12.3%. We use sugar beets, we're just down slightly from our previous forecast, 0.3% for planted, 0.2% for harvested. However, we are up 5.4% on yield and expecting a 1.4% increase in overall production for the season. Looking at sugarcane, obviously we only estimate for these two crops, we only estimate harvested acres. Harvested acres for sugarcane, we are expecting to be up 1.3% from June. That is down still 0.9% from our previous season. We're up 0.9%, 1.9% on yield, coming at 37 tons to the acre, and overall production at 34 million tons is up 1% from the previous year. Looking kind of at tobacco acres, we did find a few more acres that were actually planted this year. So we are up 4.4% from June. However, tobacco is still continuing that trend of downward. So there's overall, still down 8.8% from the prior year. Switching over to a couple of our non-field crops today. So we've got estimates for our non-citrus fruit and nut crops. So looking at apples, overall, you can see our chart for apple production over the last 10 years. Our apple production this season is going to be down 2.2%. The scale on the chart makes it look a little bit larger than it is, but very in line with very similar to some of our prior years. Cranberry production, we're up 1.6%. Massachusetts, the second largest producing state's up 12% compared to the previous year. So they're expecting a pretty good year up there. Looking at grapes, grape production, we are up 7.7% on production. And we also have a chart down here on the bottom that shows the production over the last few years. And did want to point out that we did add New York and Oregon back to the estimating program for grapes. That was one of our program changes to add them back in. So New York and Oregon are both represented in this forecast today. Peaches, looking at peaches, this is our first all peach forecast of the year. As you guys may remember, in May, we forecast just California only. So this is our first full peach forecast of the year, up 22.2% this season. California, which is obviously the largest producing state for peaches, is looking at the highest production since 2017. So pretty good year they're expecting out in California. Looking at pears, predominantly in the West Coast region, where we're Washington, Oregon, California, 520,000 tons this season. This will be the lowest U.S. production dating back to 2007. Obviously, we're down 21.9%. So those are the crops that we have for today. Listing a few of our upcoming reports, upcoming releases. We've got rice stocks coming out on the 21st, cattle on feed, county estimates for cash rents. We have one of our census publications coming out on August 29th. Ag prices on the 30th. Our CARES reports will be out on September 3rd, followed up by being back in here on September 12th to go through cotton Jennings and crop production. Today we have our chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board, Lance Honig, is going to be on X taking questions at 1:15 about today's report. And as always, feel free to always contact us, web, phone, or email. We always like to do it. All right, well, that's all I've got for today.
All right, well, I have a little more for you here. I'm gonna walk you through the WASDE report next. So first of all, right off the bat, all of this information that Fleming reported this morning gets incorporated into US balance sheets today. We're also gonna talk a little bit internationally, focus a bit on Kazakhstan, Ukraine, wheat, corn, and soybean, wheat, corn, and sunflower seed. So let's go ahead and start with global wheat production raised this month. That globally, that would be a new record, record large wheat production. Going through the countries, so Australia up 1 million tons. That basically some improved conditions in Western Australia, recent rains, better rains there. European Union down 2 million tons. That is mainly France. Harvest results and just excess rainfall that we've been talking about for the past few months now. Ukraine wheat production up. That's state government data. In Kazakhstan, we'll talk about that next. That mainly reflects some really good, unusually good growing conditions for them this year. So let's focus just a little bit on Kazakhstan here. So the green area, that's the part of the country where most of the wheat is produced in country. And the main story here is just that it's been raining, and it's been raining a lot in Kazakhstan. And keeping in mind that this is a country where it's usually pretty arid. So this level of rainfall and maybe in a lot of other countries could be detrimental, but in Kazakhstan, a relatively arid climate. It's welcome, very favorable. This is just a ranking over the past 30 years of this year's rainfall relative to recent history. So well above average rainfall. And it's showing up in satellite imagery and the VHI is very good conditions. The way you read this is the greens, blues, and purples are what you want to see. And that is what we're seeing in the main wheat growing areas of Kazakhstan. And also just more data, the NDVI as well, we're above the upper range of recent history for the crop conditions in Kazakhstan. So with that, we raised yields this month, up 10% from last month, and that would be up about 32% year over year. And so this, again, this change, it's all yield driven, all based on those favorable rainfall totals. Global wheat balance sheet. I put up the old crop year here. That's essentially final at this point. We just incorporated the final trade data for the marketing year. So that old balance sheet is pretty well set. Focusing on 2024, 2025, the current crop year. Few things to point out here. Wheat feed use raised this month 2.8 million tons. Few things driving that, mainly increase in the EU feed quality wheat there, driving that, and also higher feed use in Ukraine and Kazakhstan, reflecting larger crops. Trade up 2 million tons. Higher exports out of Ukraine and Australia, partially offset by lower exports out of the EU. US balance sheet. Here again, I put up the old crop year. Just one small change there. It's worth noting food use up 1 million bushels. That is based on the most recent NAS flour milling report. And you can see, so that raised raised food use for the old crop year, we carried that through into the new crop year as well, up a bit. So now focusing on the new crop year, incorporating the production information from NAS, along with the small change in increased food use. Most of that NAS production change just tightens up ending stocks. As you can see, we didn't change our price forecast this month. Moving into rice. More changes on the back year this year than on, or this month than on the new crop year. So let me walk through those real quickly. Brazil rice production raised this month. That's just incorporating data from CONAB. Perhaps the flooding in Rio Grande do Sul wasn't quite as devastating as initially assumed. So got production up a bit. Philippines, that's also some updated government data. And Vietnam down in both the old crop year and the new crop year. That's mainly area driven, guided by information from Post. Just a lower area there, some concerns about salinization of land and whatnot. So area declining in Vietnam. Global balance sheet, really small changes here, both in the old crop year and the new crop year. Not much of a story overall. 2023 crop year, a little bump up in trade. That's mainly Thailand there. New crop year, trade down a little bit. That's Vietnam, smaller crop there. Ending stock down a bit as well. That's also driven by Vietnam. And consumption down a little bit overall too. That is lower consumption in Philippines, Vietnam, and Kenya. U.S. rice balance sheet, again, incorporating the information we got from NAS this morning. But first starting on the old crop year, crop still being marketed right now. Raised our export forecast, 1.5 million hundredweight. That reflects some recent shipments of medium short grain that we're incorporating now into that forecast, mainly to North Asian markets. So again, that's all medium short grain. Tightens up ending stocks a little bit on the old crop year. So that means a little bit tighter beginning stocks coming into the new crop year. Coupled with NASA's production change, yield reduction, mainly a lower yield in long grain, tightens up total supplies, and that is reflected directly in the ending stocks estimate, reducing ending stocks by the same amount as the reduction in total supply. No change in our price forecasts. Moving into corn. Old crop year, 2023, 2024. Argentina corn production down 2 million tons this month. That harvest is almost complete at this point. So this is government data based on harvest results, shrinking the size of that crop by a bit. Also worth noting, Ukraine raised the back year crop by 1.5 million tons. And essentially what this just reflects is the fact that they've been exporting a lot, and you can't export more than you grow. So, it suggests that our previous forecast or previous estimate of the size of their crop was probably underestimated. So we had to raise that crop. So we raised by 1.5 million tons. Now focusing on the new crop year or upcoming crop year. Change in the United States we'll talk about, of course, in a couple slides from now. Otherwise, you'll see the increase in the United States is more than offset by decreases in much of the rest of the world, including lower production in the EU. That is mainly lower production in Southeast Europe and Serbia, where it's been hot and dry. that heat and dryness also extends into Ukraine and Russia. We'll talk a little bit about Ukraine. But you can see there, we lowered both Ukraine and Russia, Serbia and the EU. So let's focus just real quickly on Ukraine. So this is the main area. This is, map for Ukraine, main production areas for corn. And then we're also going to look a little bit at sunflower seed. So Ukraine's other major fall harvest crop, grown in much the same areas, but a little bit further concentrated a little bit further to the east. And the main story here in Ukraine this summer during the growing season is it's been relatively dry. My pointer's not working. It's been relatively dry. The red line is the rainfall trace for 2024. You can see we started out with some pretty good moisture early in June, and then it's just been, periodic rainfall, but well below average and fairly dry overall. And that's of course, this is the main corn growing region, and this is similar for the primary sunflower seed areas. Here it's even a little bit drier, rainfall even further below average. And not only has it been dry, but maybe the real story is that it's also been very hot, extreme heat, some of the hottest temperatures on record for July. This is the main corn growing area. This is the sunflower seed area. So between it being relatively dry and very hot, it doesn't bode well for yields. So here, again, this is a satellite imagery of the vegetative health index. Again, you want to see the greens and the purples and the blues, but we're seeing mostly yellows and reds here. So these production areas are suffering from heat stress and drought. So our corn production forecast lowered this month to 27.2 million metric tons, down 2% from last month. That would be about a 16% drop year over year. And this is mostly a yield change, but also a small area decrease year over year, as you can see as well. Similar with sunflower seed, yields also down there as well, reflecting the heat and dryness. So next, let's focus on the global corn balance sheet. Back year, 2023, 2024. Main thing to mention there, global trade reduced 400,000 tons this month. That is mainly smaller crop in Argentina, so lower exports there, partially offset by higher exports out of the Ukraine and US. Now for the new crop year, the upcoming crop year, feed use down 1.9 million metric tons, lower feed use in the EU, reflecting a smaller crop there, and then a lot of small offsets as well. Trade, global trade reduced 300,000 tons. Have some offsets there. Lower exports out of the EU, Ukraine, Russia, and Serbia, partially offset by higher exports out of the US. Ending stocks down globally, mainly driven by lower stocks in the EU, Serbia, and US. Speaking of the US, let's look at that balance sheet here real quick. Current crop year, we might say the old crop year, 2023, 2024, a little bit of a reduction in FSI use, just reflecting recent data there, and that carries through into the new crop year as well. And then exports we raised in the old crop year. We're seeing some counter-seasonal strength in our export pace. And the new crop year, Obviously, the big thing to change this month, of course, is the new production data from NAS. So that's incorporated in there directly as a 47 million bushel increase in production, coupled with a small reduction in beginning stock, so 37 million bushel increase in supplies. Export forecast raised 75 million bushels this month. Couple things going on there. Lower competing exports. You saw global production down in many of our major exporting competitors there. Competitive U.S. prices and still strong demand. So seeing some export strength. And so when all of that, when it's all worked through the balance sheet, despite the increase in production this month from NAS, we still end up with a slightly lower ending stocks this month. Season average price, we reduced 10 cents per bushel, just mainly reflecting observed recent futures prices. All right, let's move into soybeans. Old crop year, main thing to talk about here is on the production side, reduction in Argentina's crop estimate. That is Ministry of Agriculture data from Argentina, partially offset by increased production in Benin, which doesn't make the list, but nevertheless is becoming an important exporter. On the upcoming crop year, the 2024 crop year, the change in the U.S., as you can see there, that kind of dominates the global production change, increase in global production, but also some production increases in some of the foreign nations as well, mainly reflecting area changes in government data. So India, that's an area change based on recent government data. Also increased production out of Ukraine, Russia, and Benin. Global soybean balance sheet. So starting again with the old crop year, trade up this month, 2.2 million tons. Brazil, increased exports out of Brazil account for 2 million of that. So some strength there. Ending stocks, made an important or noteworthy change in our, you can see our China import forecast raised by 3.5 million tons this month. And that, as we've been doing recently, as you know, that reflects export shipments to China from other countries reported through July. So a lot of strength there. And so globally ending stocks up, driven mainly by that increased stocks in China, partially offset by lower stocks out of Brazil and Argentina. On the new crop year, crush up a little bit less than 1 million tons there. Mainly higher crush in various importing countries, as well as Russia and Ukraine. Trade up 1 million tons this month. Higher exports out of Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S., partially offset by lower exports out of Argentina, reflecting their smaller crop. On the other hand, on the other side of the ledger, imports higher by Egypt, the EU, Iran, and Turkey. And those are some of the countries also where we're seeing higher crush as well. Ending stocks raised this month, 6.5 million tons. That is mainly higher ending stocks in China, partially offset by lower ending stocks in Brazil. U.S. soybean balance sheet, really no changes on the back here, so I'm just putting up the out year forecast here. The big production change we got this morning from NAS kind of dominates the changes, as you can see there, up 154 million bushels. And with that big increase in supply, we raised exports 25 million bushels, and the rest of it just goes into stocks. So mainly This is just growing US stocks reflecting that higher production. Season average price forecast reduced 30 cents per bushel this month, and that would be consistent with those higher stocks and larger supplies. Cotton. In terms of global cotton production, again, the U.S. is the biggest change there in terms of the major global producers. Otherwise, India reduced 500,000 bales, reflecting government data. That's mainly an area story there, and also African Frank Zone. That's also lower area. Global cotton balance sheet. Main thing I put up the back here. Main thing to worth noting there. We made a multi-year revision in China's production going back a few years, basically reflecting the production outside of Xinjiang. Indeed, there's lower production outside of Xinjiang than we've been assuming, and that is showing up in lower production and a little bit tighter ending stocks in China. That goes back a few years and then carries into the new crop year as well. Speaking of new crop year, consumption reduced 1 million bales. That is primarily reduced consumption in China. Trade reduced 1.1 million bales. Worth noting that China recently lowered their import quota, so we're gonna, that's gonna be reflected in lower imports by China. And also, you'll see later we reduced our U.S. export forecast as well. China ending stocks reduced by 3.9 million bales, and that is pretty much in line with what a lot of other analysts are saying as well. U.S. balance sheet for the old crop, 2023, 2024. Raised exports a bit there. That is mainly just reflecting recent data. There was a revision in some of the export data due to some late reporting, so we incorporated that. So that raised our old crop export forecast, and along with some changes in the residual, ends up with a small increase in ending stocks, combined with the relatively large reduction in U.S. production from the NASS reports this morning. Almost 1.9 million bale reduction in U.S. production. We reduced exports by 1 million bales, reflecting both that smaller crop, so relatively tighter U.S. supplies, along with lower global trade and reduced global demand. And the result is ending stocks for cotton tightening up by about 800,000 bales. Season average market price dropped again this month, down 2 cents per pound. Again, just reflecting recent futures prices and in the current outlook. All right, winding things down here on crops. Let's talk real quickly about sugar and sugar balance sheet. For the old crop year, 2023, 2024, mainly on the production side, truing up data as the year winds down based on data from the processors. In terms of trade, a little bit more sugar dribbling in from Mexico, so we adjusted that a bit, as you can see. Also raised our high tier sugar import forecast, and that is just reflecting the pace. It's pace to date, projecting out for the rest of the year. Domestic deliveries lowered as well, and that is mainly a reduction in direct consumption. Largely a reduction in direct consumption imports based on data for the old crop year, which then we also carry through into the new crop year as well. And then speaking of the new crop year, again, the main change here that dominates is the increase in beet production, reflecting the NASS data we got this morning. big yields there, suggesting a large sugar beet crop. And for the most part, that carries right through into ending stocks, raising the stocks to use ratio to 15.9%, and that's up to 2.4 percentage points just this month. Mexico sugar balance sheet. So on the old crop year, couple things to note. Imports, Mexican imports. Mexico continues to import a little bit higher than we expected. So based on some information from Post and just kind of watching that pace, we increased Mexico's sugar imports by 50,000 metric tons for the old crop year. And we also reduced Mexico's domestic use of sugar, partly because we're seeing some, high prices and some switching to use of high fructose corn syrup in its place. Exports up a bit, just reflecting pace. So ending stocks for Mexico raised 127,000 metric tons, carrying into the new crop year. And they're going to need those stocks because production up this year, but still not fully recovered to the levels that Mexico traditionally produces. So total supply is up 127,000 metric tons. Now, ending stocks for Mexico, as you know, they basically target 2.5 months of use, and trade is the residual. So with those higher beginning stocks and that level of ending stocks, it suggests that Mexico can increase their exports by about 136,000 metric tons. And that would be all going to third countries. We didn't raise our exports to the US this month. All right, now into meat and livestock. Just a few more slides here for that. Relatively small changes on the meat and livestock side this month. Beef production up 80 million pounds for 2024. Now, again, we're shifting into calendar years, and beef production up, just reflecting higher slaughter pace, partially offset by lower weights. Pork production down a bit. On the other hand, that is reflecting just third quarter slaughter data and a little bit lighter weights. Didn't make any change for 2025 for pork. Broilers and turkey for the current calendar year, truing up to recent production and hatchery data. And now we are a little bit more confident in our turkey forecast as well, which we reduced last month, but we have some additional data suggesting a little bit of a tightening up of the production there, reflecting the low prices and really poor margins in the turkey sector. And that lower production we expect to carry into, or the production reduction we expect to carry into 2025, although still a little bit of a year-over-year increase. Prices, steer prices continue to be strong, very strong demand for fed cattle. So just based on observed prices, raised $1.25 per hundredweight for 2024, and then that carries into the first quarter of 2025 there as well. Hogs saw a little bit of strength in the third quarter on the hog price, observed hog prices. But overall, we're not seeing any real sustained demand strength. So we expect prices to continue to weaken into 2025. Lowered our hog price forecast this month by $1 per hundredweight, and that would be down year over year, $1.63 per hundredweight. Broilers and turkey, again, for the old calendar year, or current calendar year, I should say, just truing up to recent price data. Turkey prices still very weak, fairly poor demand, and but we think prices likely bottomed in 2024 and should start to strengthen as we get into next calendar year. Meat trade, not a whole lot. Main thing to note here is now we have June census trade data. So we got 6 months of the year under our belt to talk about. Pulled back our pork production forecast, again, just kind of truing up to that recent trade pace that we're seeing. A lot of just seeing a lot of export competition, especially from Brazil, and also a strong US dollar might be reducing our competitiveness to some degree there. The rest of the changes are pretty minor. Beef import forecast raised again this month, strong demand for processing grade beef, primarily from Oceania. And dairy. Main thing here, both 2024 and 2025, production is down. Our change is down this month for both years. We're seeing some constrained heifer supplies, so lower cow inventories, and especially for 2024, lower milk per cow, reflecting some recent heat stress, presumably. In terms of trade, small changes, not much of a story there. I mean, basically what we're seeing, strong prices in the US and internationally. Tight production, strong demand. So in terms of the US and global trade balance, we're kind of in a tight equilibrium there, and fairly small changes this month. And finally, dairy product prices. Similar to last month, and I kind of summarize it as higher for the most part, seeing some strength in demand, tight supplies overall. Last prices, class 3 price for 2024, up this month 15 cents per hundredweight, reflecting those strong cheese and whey prices. Class 4 price also up as the stronger NDM prices more than offset slightly lower butter prices. All milk prices raised for both 2024 and 2025, and we're basically seeing good margins, strong prices, and combined with relatively lower feed costs as well. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and happy to take your questions. I'm sure you'll have some, and thank the folks who joined us in the room today. I hope you got something out of this, learned a little bit about what our thinking was in putting the WASDE together, and also thank the folks online. Hope